tremendous joy. Now, a key factor for success is a stewardship committee. So we're going to talk to you about how to build a champion team in your stewardship committee. Now, this is me. I'm Dennis Green. I've been at this for more than 30 years. I started, my first client was in 1983. It's the First Presbyterian Church in Oklahoma City. And I'm still in touch today with the chairman of that effort, Ray Potts. His wife, Pat, and I worked together. And when his church was going through planning, he said, Dennis, come help us. And we've been friends ever since. So I've been collecting data ever since then. I've been blessed to work with dozens of other people on serving capital campaigns. And we've served over 200 churches in capital campaigns. That's where we derive a whole lot of our research, from understanding what worked in a church capital campaign and what caused failure in a church capital campaign. And those lessons help everybody with an annual stewardship effort and a year-round church stewardship effort. So it's a delight to share this information with you. Now, you have on your Zoom panel an opportunity to click and send us questions. Please do that at any point in time. Now, I'm going to let Marthame introduce himself. He's a wonderful guy. It's nice to have a guy like him in my life. He's not just a friend, but he's an expert, and he's a lot younger than me, so he's a great deal more nimble when it comes to using technology and applying it to the church world. And right now he's in a fascinating ministry about finding church in non-traditional ways. Marthame, do you mind talking a little bit about yourself?
Not at all. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Dennis has already said pretty much everything that I would say. I first met Dennis through a capital campaign that Church Development consulted with the congregation I was serving as pastor, Oglethorpe Presbyterian Church in Atlanta. And then when I was moving into other directions, including what you see right there, a podcast and a new direction in ministry, and leaving the pastorate into more non-traditional forms of ministry, reached out to Dennis and said, I think I can work with y'all. I know the system from the pastor side, and I believe in the product. And so that's what brings me here today. And I'm excited to be with y'all and share both things that I've learned the hard way and the easy way.
I'm glad that you're here. Now, speaking of hard way and the easy way, we're going to talk about failure a lot. And this stems from my son's obsession with Chuck Norris. I've got a 12-year-old son. And he said, Dad, Chuck Norris got some great advice for success in life. He said, number one, find out what doesn't work. And then number two, don't do that. Now, John Green, that's deep and meaningful. And that's how we will proceed today. Kind of reverse engineering, failure analysis. Now, church development has existed since 1992, and we've raised hundreds of millions of dollars in church capital campaigns. And we always stick around for 3 years to help all of our churches with their stewardship campaigns and with planned giving as well. We derive a lot of information, a lot of data from that helps us improve our church capital campaigns. That's where we make our money, but our passion is stewardship, because it is so purely a spiritual function. Just the understanding that all we have comes from God, and we are meant to be conduits for God's blessing. That's a fundamental part of living out our Christian life. Now, this is our website. Take a look. It's got a ton of free stuff on there, church-development.com. We try to give away just virtually everything. We've got lots of videos, lots of free resources. Please send me questions and answers, and we will provide lots of answers as we go. And I've got a lot of resources that I will refer to as we go, both hard copies like the campaigns that we work through, and web-based resources, of which we have many. Now, I'd like you to do that right now. Please click on that Q&A and send me a note about yourselves. Tell me something wonderful that God has blessed you with, and tell me what you'd like to get out of today's webinar. So we've got about another 35, 40 minutes together, and I would like to tailor this in any way that we can to help you meet your stewardship planning objectives. And give me your toughest questions too. Since I've got both Marthame and Meredith here to help me, I think we can take pretty good run at just about any question that you might give us. And your questions will pop up on my screen. I can see those as we go. And here's one right now. Dennis, what percent of churches have an active stewardship team? Well, that's a great question. I teach a lot of workshops, and I always ask that question. Now, my personal experience from this non-scientific method is less than half have a stewardship committee. And those that do raise their hand, then the next question I ask is it also your finance committee? So anytime there's stewardship and finance together, that spells doom. That means it's going to be finance 11 months out of the year and stewardship just 1. Now, those are 2 different ways of thinking, and we'll talk about those different ways of thinking. But to really do a good job with stewardship, you need a year-round stewardship committee. And that's, I would say that is the one single key to success. And that's reason number 1 why churches fail at stewardship. There's no leadership, there is no committee. And that spells doom. Unfortunately, well, there's a book, Giving Matters. And in that, the researchers, among them is Zek, the author who wrote Why Catholics Don't Give. He's from Villanova. They did an analysis of churches that did their first annual stewardship campaign. And each denomination, they broke it down by denomination. Every single church that did their first annual stewardship campaign experienced an increase in giving by 10%. So what does that tell you? Doing something works. So that's what we're going to point to today. And we want to talk to you. There are many diocesan directors of stewardship online today as part of this. I want to give you resources that you could just pass on to others. I don't want to denigrate my own profession, but a whole lot of it is if you show up, if someone will just take the reins, you're going to be more of a success than you are today. For instance, the most simple thing, you can Google this right now. Do you deliver envelopes into every single home every single month? Now, in this age of online giving, we're moving away from envelopes, but we're not all the way there. The best church I know of has about half of their churches on automated giving. But for those other half, they need a monthly reminder. If you just do that one thing, and it costs about $6 or $7 per household per year, you're going to experience an increase of about 9% in your giving. Just that one single thing. So this can come from a leader concerned with stewardship. So if somebody takes the reins, they can do the most mundane things that will equate to a minimum of a 9% increase. Now this quick chart will tell you that only about half of all churches do an annual campaign. Maybe 20% have a real stewardship committee. Maybe 1% actually teach stewardship regularly. And almost nobody has a culture of stewardship where it's part of the language, where we look for ways to pass our blessings on. So there's a fundamental lack of understanding about what is stewardship and a real core missing of the embrace that stewardship is a vital part of running a healthy church. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about the role of the stewardship committee, the importance of shared leadership. We're going to talk about who to invite to put on your stewardship committee. Then number 4 is the real important thing, the resources you can share with your committee so that when you're recruiting your stewardship people, you can say to them, I've got your back. You don't have to read an encyclopedia full of facts and figures to discern the little nuggets that we can do. I've got tools that I'm going to deliver to you on a monthly basis that's going to give you the agenda, checklist, calendar, resources, newsletters, cut and paste items, solicitation letters, thank you letters, scripts, items that the pastor can talk about. If you are recruiting and you say to your potential leaders, I've got all this stuff for you, there's a much higher likelihood that they will say yes, because most people do not know what the heck they are doing. And then number 5, and I want to modify number 5 because we're going to talk about success stories, and we will also talk about failure as well and the lessons that we have painfully learned from that. Now, the role of the committee is to do these 4 things: educate people about what is stewardship, to design your year-round stewardship calendar of activities, to implement, to put in the human time, and it does take time. It's like any other business. The International Council, but the International Catholic Stewardship Council has a great framework or parameter. They say we all ought to be investing 2% of our budget in stewardship activities. Now, if you look at it the other way, that's a 50-to-1 return on investment. For every dollar we invest, that's $50 we get back. Implied within that is you do have to spend something. You do have to spend that 2% to get the 50 return. So the implementation does take time, does take energy, but it gets a fantastic ROI. I wish I could invest my retirement account and get a 50-to-1 ROI. Now, the fourth function is to evaluate what went well and what didn't go well. And maybe even more specifically, evaluate it as what works for us. What can we do to tailor our efforts to the unique personality of our church, of our people? Because we don't want to, a Southern Baptist church in Southern Texas is very different from a Lutheran church in Northern Minnesota. I mean, we all have these unique, different personalities. All right, now let's leap into action. The educating on stewardship has to begin with self and others. Has to begin with self before it can include others. So when you pull your team together, you're going to want to educate them. One of the best books, in my opinion, is Henry Nouwen's book, The Spirituality of Fundraising, because it really clearly states that we are serving God and we're facilitating generosity of donors, which is part of their spiritual path. So I've got to get square with understanding that before I can go forth and educate others. The key method that we've discovered in educating others is not really the pastor lecturing, but it is lay people talking about how they think of stewardship, how they are conduits for God's blessings. So number two, stewardship efforts are not going to succeed if people don't understand the spirituality of stewardship. And I would welcome you to jump in, Martheme. I know you're working with the, can't remember, the church near Stone Mountain on their annual giving. And I remember, almost a year ago when you talked about beginning with them, you talked about how they did nothing. And I remember you saying something like their initial interests are, we should focus on how much money we need to meet the annual budget. Now, let me ask you, have you been able to shift their thinking just a little bit to budget-driven, to spirituality-driven? Do you mind talking about your effort there in Stone Mountain?
Yeah, no problem at all. I've been working with the church out even a little further out than Stone Mountain, and I was brought on through church development to basically ride shotgun on their annual stewardship campaign and to take some of the staff burden off of the pastor and work with them part-time over a few months, actually over 12 months. And we implemented the steps of church development's stewardship system. And within that 1 year, we increased the number of pledges by 80%. The number of pledging households. Half of those were people who had not pledged to the church before. They have a lot of families who are either new to Christianity, so they're doing a lot of outreach, and so stewardship and those kind of conversations were brand new. We tailored it, just like Dennis was talking about, to talk about generosity rather than stewardship because of the context of this new church plant. And the giving went up 60% just in that first year alone.
Amazing. That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Pulling a team together and implementing an annual campaign that was more than just, oops, we got to do this. Let's send out a postcard before the date gets past us. And it was tremendous. And like to Dennis's point, those numbers are really impressive to me. And I feel really amazing about what happened at that church. I think what has been also astonishing is the sense of people from, well, I'll serve on this committee because the pastor asked me. That was the beginning of the year. Now they're being asked to recruit people to roll this team over, and they're thrilled and have loved being on this team and just excited about it. The results have made that easier for them, obviously, but the fact of having a team that meets once a month and prays together and learns together and studies together and works on stewardship together has been just a huge shift in culture.
Awesome. Now I'm going to take a risk of alienating everybody that's watching, but I want to take one little slice out of that. First, I want to celebrate and congratulate Martheme on a massive home run. But you notice he very, very carefully selected the word generosity and stewardship as terms that that committee dealt with. Now, those are both replacements for the old word tithing. So you, as you think about this concept in your church, you've got to select words that fits with your people. Now, at risk of alienating you, the cognitive linguistics of these terms are really split up by age. So somebody 70 or older is going to be very comfortable with the concept of tithing. From 69 down to about 40, they're going to be good with stewardship. And then younger than 40, they're going to prefer the term generous. Now, I can see on the horizon the next term that's coming up is going to be something like sharing. Now, if you say the word tithing to a 25-year-old, unfortunately, they interpret that as tax. So you got to be very careful about your selection of terms. Now, this brings up, point 3. Education is the primary focus of this committee, and I've got a great case study, the Diocese of Wichita. 20 years they invested in encouraging their 100 parishes in their diocese of doing a good job with stewardship education. They did one primary system, and that is having lay speakers talk about what does stewardship mean to me. They had 3 questions. Number 1, how has God blessed me? Number 2, how do God's blessings flow through me? So I'm going to talk about, what do I donate money to? What do I volunteer for? And what do I pray for? And then number 3, how did my life change once I got the idea of stewardship, that I'm meant to be a conduit for God's blessing? And their limit was 2 minutes and 59 seconds. They couldn't talk for 3 minutes or longer because people are just going to shut off. So that was their goal. Now, the statistics tell the tale. It took 20 years, but they increased annual giving as a percentage of per capita income. So this is an apples to apples comparison. By double. They went from 1.2% to 2.4% of income. Now, 1.2% is the national Catholic average, which it's pretty pathetic. That's why Zach wrote his book, Why Catholics Don't Give. The Protestant average is 2.2%. So Catholics are not quite half, but almost. Now, there's something to learn from that case study. We should all employ lay speakers to do our educating for us. Now, a lot of churches do not feel comfortable having a lay speaker up front at the end of church talking during announcements. So what do? You get out your handy dandy iPhone, smartphone of any type, and you make a video that you then email out or you post. And it costs no money. It's not slick. It doesn't have high production values, but it doesn't matter. 2 minutes and 59 seconds of people telling their story. They get forwarded. They get lots of hits. People love it. All right, now let's move on. Second function, to design a comprehensive stewardship strategy. So these 7 parts are what compose a stewardship strategy. I wrote a book on this subject, The Stewardship System. If you let me know, I'll send you a copy of that book for free, and I'll connect you with our web-based resources, the Stewardship System as well. But these are the components that make up a comprehensive stewardship strategy. Education is one, prayer, and in particular, discernment, discerning God's will in my life. Number 3, involvement in decision-making. In the old days, I thought it was horrible to ask anybody what color we should paint the bathrooms, and now I think we should ask, and we should ask their input on virtually everything. Number 4, social connecting. George Barna wrote a book on church shoppers, and unfortunately, he said we're facing the death of denominationalism. People are going to join for social connecting reasons above theology. I think that's fascinating. Number 5, volunteer opportunities, and in particular, episodic volunteer opportunities. Matthew Kelly thinks that about 6% of our people are deeply involved, around 15% are in the center ring, and the other 79% are in that outer ring of very uninvolved. Gallup polling is not quite so pessimistic. They think that center ring is about 15%, then the middle ring is about 50%, and the outer about 35%. But once you get outside that inner core of super involved people, that outer 85% don't want to commit to be on a standing committee. So we have got to create episodic volunteer opportunities where someone who's marginally involved can just get in and get out. It can be a Saturday morning for an hour. It can be a Sunday morning checking a box, counting things, distributing, checking kids in. It can be anything, but the episodic nature seems to be the key. We discovered that volunteers give 11 times more than non-volunteers. So we want to just find ways to engage people as volunteers and make it fun and make it easy, make it an hour long. It might be easier to hire somebody to do something, but it's going to be much more fruitful, and you will be a servant to that person if you facilitate their volunteering. Number 6 is you have to have 4 asks per year. Your annual, every year you have to do a capital. Now, I'm not saying doing a capital campaign. We think a normal cycle that we see evolving is for a church to do a capital campaign on a cycle kind of like a college, about every 5 years to do a church capital campaign. There seems to be no decrease in annual giving, but I am not implying that you do a church capital campaign every single year. Instead, do a capital ask, like we need to replace the piano, fix the organ, redo the carpet, the air conditioning, pay down some debt, the windows. The latest fad thing is really a lot of fun is solar panels. I'm working with a group in Maryland, and they put up solar panels, and as their thank you gift, they're giving everybody a miniature solar panel that can charge up their cell phone. It's really a very fun project. We also want to do an emergency ask. Some people will only give if it's an absolute emergency. And you need to do your year-end ask as well, your Christmas gift. A lot of times we raise 10% of all the money we raise in the course of a year just on that Christmas ask. And then we've got to thank people, and it's important. 15% of your people are going to hate to be thanked, but 85% want 2 of those doodads. So we're going to offer the thanks to everyone, and we're going to get an anonymous volunteer, usually is me, to underwrite the cost of the thank you gift. So my donation can be the doodad of whatever that is. Now, we just had a smashing success at Holy Trinity Catholic Church, where they were not quite as good as Marthame. Their number's not quite as good, but we got a 20% increase the first year. They took a serious, sustained effort at a stewardship effort. Lots of engagements, lots of social activities involving people in decision making. No high pressure ask, very much a prayer based ask. And they had about a 20% increase in giving. And on top of that, we had one person come in and say, oh, I've been slacking behind the business as well. Here's a check for $100,000. We had a different person come in and say, what's up with the house right next to the church? And the pastor said, well, it's a house next to the church. So what? The guy said, well, why don't I buy that and give it to the church? We could use the space. Pastor said, that's a great idea. So good stewardship does spring forth generosity. That's what this campaign, that's what this stewardship committee really can do. They're like farmers of goodwill. The implementing a strategy, it is going to take time. When Marthame said meet an hour every month, that's kind of the beginning. Marthame, you talk for a minute. How hard was it to convince that committee that they've got to A, meet every month, and then B, they got to put in a little bit of time to actually implement the 7 different kinds of stewardship activities?
Well, it was actually a little bit easy because they were already contracting with us, so they needed to justify the expense of hiring me to consult with them. I think one of the most telling things that I noticed over the course of the year was, Dennis, and you mentioned this already, the thank you gift. It took some convincing that we were going to give a thank you gift for anyone who made a pledge to the annual stewardship campaign. And for many of the reasons that you've already highlighted, people feel, oh, well, we should be spending our money on something else. I'm giving not because I get thanked, and so on and so forth. And we came up with these beautiful little Christmas ornaments. There was a picture of the church, and at the end of the year, I asked them, as we were starting to recruit the next people, what is the number one surprise for you this year? And I remember one lady in particular said, I know I fought you on those Christmas ornaments, but I know you're right. And so I think it was overall, we're talking about the wisdom of these practices, which they have results behind them. There's theology behind them. There's depth to them, and there's a reason to do them. They take a little bit more money up front, but they more than pay off in return. I'm convinced that we got our whatever money we spent on thank you gifts, we got back more than that in additional pledges. And yes, we also had a anonymous donor cover the cost of the thank you gift, which helped
That's great.
defray that issue.
That's great. Well, thank you, Martha. Now, let me take a couple of questions. Bob McKay says, so you said the church is the last in giving. Any hints for me and my committee? Yes, do something, okay? Just take it on yourself to do one thing starting now. And I recommend lay speakers. It doesn't cost you anything. You can videotape, you can email them out. Start with that just to educate people. After you've got that going for 3 or 4 months, then add your second thing. Maybe you do cut and paste in your bulletin every single week. And then after that, you gear up to do your annual campaign. And then after that, you have a more deliberate prayer and discernment effort as part of your annual campaign. So take baby steps, Bob, get it up and get it going. But this is a wonderful business to be in because virtually everything works. It's kind of weird to think I've never had a failure in this. It's because everything that we do works. And we're in a growth industry because our people are only given 1 to 2%, and we all ought to be given 10. That's the right thing. And everything that we do, and it's all research based. So do something, start small, and just add on incrementally. Now, Doug asked a question, what's your stewardship to budget relationship? How much of the budget do you shoot to cover? Now, in most churches, budgeted revenue from pledges is about 90% of all revenue. So that's really our target. Now, getting even microscopically minute related to that, my personal goal that I ask churches to consider is, can we get that 90% covered by electronic fund transfer giving? Can we shift our people from check or cash over to the very, very deliberate automatic withdrawal that happens on a regular basis? That's my personal goal. Now, we're deviating from this, but one of the future strategies that I'd like you to consider is to have kiosk giving in your foyer. Do it right now. Why? I mean, I'm 60. I got a 30-year-old son. He hasn't carried cash for a long time. We got chewed out by a church client of ours in New York City because one of the members of the stewardship committee said, Dennis, you're making it really hard for me to give. I don't carry cash. I don't carry a checkbook. Matter of fact, can't remember the last time I wrote a check. Please make it easy for me. So we want to make it easy for that next generation, people who are younger than me, to make an easy gift. Now, Elizabeth asked, are the capital campaign and the stewardship committee combined? I'm on capital committee and we are separate. I like combining them. Matter of fact, when we set up a capital campaign, a church capital campaign, we're there for about a year, and then we ask for people to volunteer to serve on the stewardship committee going forward for the next 3 years, and we hold their hands through the process and really get them up and get them going, sharing them what worked in other churches. And that becomes the sense of continuity. And then 5 years later, when they do another capital campaign, they've got a group of well-educated people. So right now you're in a tough spot. I would try to find some way to merge or at least get some overlap. Maybe you got 2 or 3 people on each one of those committees. You're asking good questions. All right, keep them coming. Now we got to keep moving because Meredith is nudging me forward rather quickly, excuse me, so we got to move kind of quick. Evaluation strategy. One of the things I like about my stewardship leader at my church, Megan, is she's really good with evaluation. She crunches numbers. So when we would get our reports after our consecration Sunday, she would say, here's how much we raised last year on the first day. Here's how much we raised 2 weeks into it, 3 weeks into it, 4 weeks into it. So we could really compare apples to apples. She would also break down, she'd get with the church bookkeeper and break it down by demographic group. Here are our regular pledgers, here are our young families, here are our occasional donors, and here are our nons, the people that we can't track. So we could really get a sense of who's doing what and why. So the data crunching is really, really important. We would even break down and look at percentage that have increased their pledges, percentage that have decreased, percentage that stayed the same. Average amounts per giving unit. It doesn't take a lot of time. Really, she just had to request the bookkeeper run those. But then she would do that, and it would equip us, and then we would really get a sense of what's working and what is not working. And it really has a cumulative effect. I mean, we would work all year on our stewardship efforts, have an annual campaign, and then we would see what the fluctuations were. And this just went into our collective consciousness, what works and what doesn't work. Now, item 2 on there, if you don't have a gift record program, which I know this is 2018 and you would think everybody is tracking about that, but that's not the case. Some churches just have people commit to writing a pledge down and they don't even keep track of pledges that are made. So I would we in our industry need to professionalize. Software is not expensive and it's incredibly helpful. So please do that. I would encourage you to incorporate stewardship ministry into parish surveys. At visitation, we would be very deliberate about surveying our people 4 times per year to ask them what their interests were, what their hopes were for the year ahead, what their priorities, what their concerns were, so that we could listen to them to see what their preferences were. Now, you know, SurveyMonkey is available to all of us and it doesn't cost very much. And it's a lot of fun and you learn a lot. I would encourage you to do 4 surveys per year to get people's input. And I would do it on virtually any topic that I could find. So I want to talk about failure just a little bit. Your stewardship committee, it's really important that it's not your finance committee, nor is it the group of people that's responsible for implementing everything. Like, just think of the number of ministries that you have at your church. Now, you know, just having sat through this workshop right here, now you know that volunteering leads to increased generosity. You know, volunteers give 11 times more than non-volunteers. Now, our stewardship committee can't be the one that organizes all those volunteers, but we can communicate with every single ministry. And we could say to them, please design episodic volunteer opportunities so that we can invite new people who are not involved into the fold. We want to engage people and we want to make it easy. Don't make them come to a monthly meeting if they just joined the church. Figure out an episodic opportunity they can come for an hour. Now, a misperception that you probably don't have, but some people do, is that third one. It's not an elite club for top donors. We want to have a top donor or 2 on the stewardship committee because they represent a pretty important cohort, a pretty important group of people, and we want to listen to them, find out what their concerns are. But it's not just a little bitty club for those folks. Now, the problem that I've had with my stewardship committee, and I'll let you talk, Martha, is that they generally, I'm in a lot of first stewardship committee meetings. Like, I just had a home run with Batavia United Methodist Church in Chicago. And the pastor, Cynthia Anderson, is just an incredibly competent, thoughtful person and very professional, but literally had nothing going on for stewardship. And I joined them by Zoom over the course of several months, just to hold the hand with the stewardship committee. And even though I was looking at them through this lens on a Zoom setup like this, they were totally deer in the headlights. They were totally clueless, unsure, and worried. Now, I want to go back to Bob's question a couple of minutes ago. Do anything. That was my mantra beginning. I'm going to say, well, here are the 7 things you could do. Let's just pick one to start with and see how it goes. And they went, their first thing they chose, which is something I like, is the lay speakers. And that ended up when we did our evaluation at the end of the annual campaign, which increased giving by about 20%. They said that was the best thing we ever could have done. We could have done it years ago, didn't cost us anything, and by far it just energized our entire congregation. All right, Martha, do you want to throw in anything about failures that you see on a regular basis as you serve different churches?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. As a success was the stewardship moments, because the lay speakers, as a pastor, it was very humbling to recognize that all of my stewardship sermons were nothing compared to the lay speakers.
That's really true.
Impact on the congregation. That doesn't mean stewardship sermons are not important. They are. But I think, to your point about separating stewardship and finance committees, that is a really critical move that took me a long time to get my head around. And one of the reasons that we finally did it at the church I served as pastor was I finally recognized that the people who are on the finance council, on the people on the finance committee, are the people who can speak finance. And there is the people who already speak finance in your congregations are likely the people who are already going to be motivated by the kind of stuff that a finance committee does.
Mm-hmm.
There's another 90% of your congregation or your parish that is not going to speak finance, and they're going to need to have other ways of being motivated. So if you have people on your stewardship committee that are not finance people, that's excellent, because they will understand even better than your treasurer and your bookkeeper and all those folk who are absolutely critical to the running of a good, transparent, healthy financial picture of a church. Those folk will understand how to connect and communicate with your congregation. So that would be a failure that we turn into a success.
Awesome. All right, Meredith has reminded me that we need to accelerate just a little bit, so forgive me. I'm going to tell one disaster of it. It's a guy I know and love, and I was in their church on this Sunday, and he stood up during announcements, and he said, "We need to give more money. And when I say me, what I really mean is you need to give more money. We're not making the budget. So please, people, pony up." And I was like, how could you make such an epic failure? You're making me feel bad. Rather than talking about the spirituality of sharing God's blessing, you're making me feel bad. So please don't be so negative, and don't be pedantic, and don't say you're a failure. I think, oh my gosh. So I personally have experienced some of the worst possible failure from people I know and love who are thoughtful, caring people, but they just don't know how to do it. Okay, so this is we need to move a little bit faster, but let me talk just for a second about the key players that you want on your stewardship committee. Get a couple people who are finance inclined, but not all of them. One or two will do. Get community builders who are marketing types, thoughtful, social, extroverted type. Get a couple high capacity donors. They represent a very important group of people, and their common characteristics are going to be the things that we're all in this together because of the spirituality of stewardship. Now, your finance data experts, they need to be able to read a balance sheet, and they can be a liaison between the two different committees, and they can be rational thinkers. That's awesome. But your community builders, one of my favorite authors, a guy named Malcolm Gladwell, and he wrote a book called A Tipping Point. And in there, I learned a new word called mavens, socially connected people. My wife is a super duper extrovert, and she's one of those mavens in our church. She's been on every different committee over the decades, and so she knows kind of everybody. That's the kind of person you want on the stewardship committee, to connect and invite. And this is not difficult to find out, not difficult to implement. They're quick to volunteer. You want people who have a high social intelligence. They're competent, they understand people, and people who are good at marketing and writing. You want a couple of high capacity donors, because you always want to be listening to their concerns, and they might bring up concerns that you might not have thought of. So we want to listen to them. Now, number two, and that can make a donation to cover the cost of non-essentials, like thank you gifts. 85% of your people are going to love thank you gifts. 15% are going to hate it. So be cognizant. Make sure you've got an anonymous donor to cover that. And they can get the ball rolling with a first gift. Now, the common characteristics that you look for is you want them to be involved because they're kind of altruistic, and they have what is best for the life of the parish at heart. And you've heard them articulate that. And they're able to enter the discomfort zone about talking about money. Now, when Zach did his analysis of why Catholics don't give, this was kind of at the top of the list, is that we are uncomfortable talking about money, very uncomfortable. And we need to get over it, because my giving life is closely tied to my spiritual life. Being a conduit for God's blessings is a critical part of my spiritual life. So we've got to be inviting and welcoming and engaging. We don't have to put people down or be pedantic, but the inviting is the key thing. And you want a bunch of team players and not a bunch of super duper types. I can do this all shouting out instructions. The fourth one that I would add that is not on here. Some people are really good at finding exceptions to every rule, and they're good at poking holes in arguments. I'm just a little bit of a delicate flower. I prefer to have very few of those people on my committee. I would prefer people who are more comfortable with improv, the idea of yes and. That's who I want on my committee. Positive, supportive, yes, let's get this ball rolling. Now, Martha, we're a little bit pushed on time. Do you want to throw in anything about a stewardship committee that you worked on because you did a really good job of populating the committee?
I think we did, and quite by accident, but it worked out really well. And yeah, those personalities are really helpful. And yeah, I would agree that you want people who can think critically, but ultimately you want people who are going to build each other up and try to make ideas better. I think one of the key learnings we had, and this was in the midst of a capital campaign, but I think a stewardship campaign is similar in that when we asked for opinions about something we were doing in that campaign, we got some pushback at one of our first meetings, and the instinct or the fear was to jettison that thing because it was too controversial. And instead we sat with it for a little while, and it ended up being something that was absolutely very critical. And what we realized was that the anxiety was about people feeling they needed to talk about it. Once they talked about it and they were heard and it was included into the process, that made a big difference. So
awesome.
Let anxiety work its way through. It can be helpful. It can be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. Now let's talk about resources for the committee. Now, when you're out recruiting people, please tell them, I have resources for you. You don't have to figure it out. Now I'm going to show you a bunch of books here. Let me click down a couple. Here are a bunch of good books. I recommend you get them all. Okay, now if the one over on your right, the Stewardship System, I'll give that to you for free. Just send me an email. But I would buy the other ones, The Spirituality of Fundraising, Best Practices, A Way of Life, and Rebuilt. These are fantastic resources. Buy them and read them. But while you do that, please know that your committee members are not going to read them. Okay, we're in a different age today. People want to click and have instantaneous exactly what I'm looking for. I want to type in a search term so I can find what I'm looking for. Don't expect me to read a 400-page work and memorize and be able to pull out the most salient point. It just doesn't happen. This is your job as a leader, along staff, and remember your reward will be in heaven for doing this. So buy these, read these, be a resource, but know that what they want is something like this stewardship system. And let me ask, Meredith is sitting just 2 cubicles away. Let me ask her, this is something that we give away to churches. The stewardship system, it's a web-based downloadable resource just for stewardship committees. So if you have a subscription and it's free, I told you this is the funnest thing that we do is this is our creative outlet. This is our watercolor painting. This is what we do for fun. But you can see it's March 2018 resources. You got a spot for first-time users. You have a training video down at the bottom. What's the role of prayer and stewardship? There's a pretty polished 3-minute video on every one of these. In preparing, you see what she just circled there. We just talked about the committee job description, the monthly stewardship committee agenda. So they don't even have to write agendas. They just click on this, download it, put the name of the church at the top and print it up. Now you do have to have Microsoft Word and Microsoft Publisher to get some of this stuff to work, but most of us have that. This is not brain surgery. It's pretty quick. It's pretty easy. So that's just some of the resources that are available. And the video down there in the bottom, there are about 30 of those there right now. I think we've got a bank of another 50 that are just 3-minute educational tools. And well, there you see stewardship education tool right there. So we've got bulletin inserts you can cut and paste that match up with the readings of the day. There are testimony guidelines. Matter of fact, we're about to shoot another testimony video as a how-to testimony video. Culture of stewardship, methods to build a culture of stewardship. So there are resources that you can download, print off, and share with your committee. So when we do a church capital campaign, we immediately give this away. We establish a stewardship committee. We hold their hand for 3 years to get up and going. And it's really pretty easy for them to sign up once they see this. They say, oh, well, somebody's done all the hard work for me. So the biggest barrier is there is not a committee. There's no one in charge. And then the number two barrier, people don't know what to do. This stewardship system does it for them. They've got everything figured out. Their year-round calendars, their checklists, there are committee agendas, solicitation letters, brochures, thank you letters, pledge cards, newsletters, pre-written columns for your pastor. It's $14,000 worth of stuff that we produce, we give away. And what we hope happens is that when somebody does a capital campaign, they call us and invite us to give a sales pitch. Not a requirement. But I mean, we've been doing this for 20-something years, giving away everything that we know and hoping that people do invite us when they do a church capital campaign to be one of the vendors that gives them a sales pitch. And it's worked out great so far. But this is really fun for us to design and create these new tools for stewardship committees. So there's a little section on church capital campaigns if you want to go to find out more. Okay, so we got to wrap it up. That's the best tool you can give your stewardship committee, to give them something that's online, downloadable, dynamic, changes every single month, that makes their lives just a heck of a lot easier. Yes, ma'am. Clear myself in a couple of minutes. Forgive me for going over our time. Okay, so any last questions before we go? Forgive me for going over. And here's a funny question. Dennis, you seem to know a lot about stewardship. How'd you get into this business? Well, you will never guess this, but my previous job was as a sewing machine needle salesman. And I know that's a pretty big leap, but my first job out of college was working at the American Embassy in Kinshasa Zaire. I lasted 3 months. And then I found out there was a shortage of sewing machine needles in that city. So I started importing those, and I quit my job, made a ton of money doing that. And by accident, so that was 1979, 1980, I ended up in a war zone with a gun to my head. And that's the first time I ever prayed and meant it. And that was a conversion experience for me back in 1980. And my prayer after that was, dear God, I know my life is in extra innings. Please help me figure out your will in my life. How might I serve you? And the answer was this: doing stewardship, helping churches do their mission, be more effective and efficient. And I love marketing, I love sales, and that this was my value to help my church flourish. So it's turned out to be a wonderful last 30 or so years. How many years has that been? 30-something years. Okay, we've got an upcoming webinar on the 22nd with lots more questions and answers. And okay, so tomorrow, Meredith said, next step, you will get an email invitation. And this is, you can get a free stewardship system account so that you can get all those downloadable resources, and you can share it with others. If others want their own, just tell them to send an email to Meredith. She will connect them with their own subscription. We have a zillion subscribers to this thing all over the world, and they give us feedback and case studies. So it's really been a fun community building thing from all over, big churches, small churches, all kinds of different denominations. You're invited to the next webinar, which is right there, the 22nd. Come with your most difficult questions. And if you're going to do a capital campaign at any time in the future, please give me a call. And we could either set up a Zoom meeting like this, or I could come out to visit with your church capital campaign committee to cover the same kind of things we've talked about today. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do send an email with any questions or concerns you have, or any other issues that we could possibly help with. Now, before we go, I want to say thank you very much, Martha. It's great to see you again, as always, my friend.
Likewise.
And thank you, Meredith, for making this happen technologically. All right, bye-bye. Over and out.